You are listening to Unscripted Moments, a podcast about propaganda. This episode is a compilation of 3 episodes with Mary Best. Mary is one of my all-time favorite guests because I have personally learned so much from Mary's knowledge on the show. This is a compilation of conversations about feminism that took place with Mary from June of 2021 to November of 2021. They appear here in the order they appeared on the podcast. First, we start with our conversation about refusing to be a man from Less Talk, More Rock, which is the first time Mary and I ever connected. Then we move into Fuck Machine from How to Clean Everything, before concluding with Ladies Nite and Loserville. This is a great series of conversations, and I wanted to honor how much these conversations with Mary mean to me by compiling them all together here. I hope you enjoy these conversations about feminism with Mary Best. Hey, Greg here. So after Keith and I recorded the episode for Refusing to be a Man, I got a voicemail from a longtime listener who was saying many amazing things in the voicemail, and I decided to go behind Keith's back and incorporate a third interview into the episode with this fantastic longtime listener who we've chatted with on social media a ton over the last year. So Mary Best, welcome to Unscripted Moments, a podcast about propaganda. Thank you for joining me for this surprise last minute interview.
Thank you for letting me talk about, well, anything I like to talk.
I'm delighted to have you here, Mary. Can you spend a moment and introduce yourself a little bit to the audience so they know who you are, what you do, and kind of what you're interested in?
Sure. My name is Mary, as was kind of said. I study gender and women's studies. I've been doing that on and off for about 20 years. But I also have been in punk bands. I have done promotion for punk bands. I used to have a radio show called The Metal Union in Toronto, and another one, another couple on Punk Radio Cast. So I've done radio and music and media as well. And I have a bit of a love-hate history with propaganda.
Okay, well, that is what I want to know about. So tell me a little bit about your interest in the band in general, because it sounds like quite a fascinating story.
Yeah, I grew up in a union family. My grandfather was part of what's sometimes called the most militant union in North America, the UMWA, specifically to Sydney, Nova Scotia. So I was always really interested in politics, and a lot of the music that I listened to kind of was that. And my best friend, who was one of my co-hosts at Punk Radio Cast, was constantly trying to get me to play propaganda. And I was like, whatever, you play it. I'm going to the bathroom.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I would just leave. I had no interest. So time progresses. I end up moving to Winnipeg in, I think it was 2005, January. Okay. But it was before Potemkin came out. And a roommate had, I don't know, gotten an advance copy from someone. And I heard it and I was like, what's this? I didn't know it was propaganda. I was like, what is this? I like this. And they said, I thought you didn't like propaganda. And I was like, well, I don't. Like that stupid fucking ska suck song. I don't have any interest. But this is propaganda. And so I listened to that record a lot before it came out. And really just loved it. It was heavier. The vocals were more kind of interesting. And of course, their politics are always, at least to my ear, on point. So I just really fell in love with them. However, before I fell in love with them, I was at an event for the Canada-Haiti Action Committee, and I got there really early, and there was only one guy there. I didn't know anyone. So we kind of started talking. He asked me why I was there, and I was there to join a punk band, which we won't talk about, but I was there to sing to front for a punk band. And I said that, and this man said I should come see you sometime. And I was like, sure, whatever, if you want to. Like, great promotionist that I am. It was Jord from propaganda. Awesome. But because I had zero interest in propaganda, I didn't know that. So we struck up a bit of a conversation, and I said maybe that I hate propaganda, not knowing I was talking to propaganda.
I love it.
Super embarrassing. I don't know if he'll remember, but like until I'm 90 with Alzheimer's, I'll be like, holy fuck, I did that.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
Well, so as everybody who listens to this show knows, so every once in a while, I put up a call on our social media for voicemails for people to comment on particular songs. There are some songs in the catalog that I know that people have extremely strong feelings on. And, something that I personally do whenever I listen to podcasts is I find myself like yelling through my headphones, like, oh my gosh, talk about this, talk about that. And so what I love about doing this show is that whenever we touch on a song that I know people will have extremely strong emotions attached to, I like to put out the call for voicemails because it brings everybody into the show. It allows listeners the chance to have a voice included on the show to comment on this amazing band. And you submitted a voicemail about refusing to be a man. And I was listening to it, and you were saying so many things, and you had so many interesting ideas and thoughts. And then the end of your voicemail timed out at 3 minutes because that's how long our voicemail is set for before it cuts you off. And so I was like, okay, we need to elaborate on this, Mary. So I reached out to you and I, wanted to have you on to talk about this stuff. But I'm curious about your interest in this particular song so we can break up the conversation a little bit. I want to know about your interest in the song, and then we can talk a little bit about some of the ideas and theories that you were extrapolating upon within the voicemail. So tell me a little bit about your interest in the song first.
Yeah. So of course, after realizing that I do in fact like Propagandhi, and they're very different than How to Clean Everything era band, I went back with a bit of my tail between my legs because best friend was quite quite smug about it. And I went back and listened to their kind of intervening records. So Less Talk, More Rock, of course, is there. And I was really into a bunch of it immediately. I mean, I subsequently like a lot of it, but I'm a person who kind of music grows on me or doesn't. And this is the last song. And I was like, what? Are they referencing second wave feminists? I was very confused because when I moved to Winnipeg, I left halfway through a term in gender and women's studies. So this was stuff that I had just like Andrea Dworkin and Catherine McKinnon and all of this kind of political lesbianism. It was all stuff that I had been reading about. And the fact that there was a musician or a series of musicians, I guess, talking about it it resonated. Interestingly, it's my least favorite song on the record musically. But
interesting.
Yeah, musically. But I really liked the lyrics, and it's one of those things. You and I were talking before about how you really need to kind of understand those Canadian undertones in order to get a Love Propagandhi. There's a bit of a secret club when you're listening to something, that sensation of a secret club. You're listening and you're like, I understand this. I wonder if other people get it. It feels a little more intimate and maybe nostalgic. So I like the lyrics a lot.
One of the things that, like, for me is that I don't understand a lot of the things that Propagandhi talks about to this day. So like this is sort of like a mission for me, is to like force myself to learn a lot more. And like, that's been one of the most gratifying experiences of making this show, is I can't believe how much talking about these songs almost turns into, centuries upon centuries of historical research, and how much I feel like I'm growing just by diving into this content. You know what I mean?
It's totally why I love Propagandhi. I mean, musically, especially now that they're heavier, I like them quite a lot. But it's the lyrics, it's the conversations. Chris's book lists, and Jord also has really good book suggestions. They're so good, and I learned so much, and they take me in a direction that I might not have otherwise kind of gotten to.
Before we dive into some of the lessons within the song and things like that, I'm curious why you do not like the music in the song.
I don't know. I sing, and I have every instrument known to man, but I don't play them. I play drums really poorly. It's just So I came to punk really late. I grew up in a really small town on the east coast of Canada, in Nova Scotia. Everyone listened to like gangsta hip hop that I didn't get. I don't think I've said, but I'm Black, I'm Caribbean descended, and everyone listened to this music that was like super offensive and talked about how like all dads were gangsters and all women were hoes, and I couldn't really wrap my head around that. But then somebody introduced me to industrial music, I think through Trent Reznor first. I ended up getting really into like Scandinavian industrial, and that led me to metal. I became obsessed with like Meshuggah and
Awesome.
bands like that. And then I found Propaganda, and that first, I don't know, I don't like their kind of softer stuff, and never really particularly, no offense, Mr. Sampson, been a fan of the weaker thans. I can listen to it, but I wouldn't seek it out, you know?
Right.
Yeah. So I like loud, angry, driving, kind of complex music, not so much simple.
Sure.
And it's only deceptively simple, to be fair, but
yeah. Well, okay, so I want to dive into a little bit of what you're talking about in your voicemail. So you just launched into it in the voicemail, and I wanted to give you a platform here to say things in a little more relaxed way with a little better of a recording quality. So I'm curious if you can recap a little bit about what you told me in our voicemail about this song, and say whatever you feel about this, because it was just such an interesting message to receive, and I was like, okay, Mara, we got to go into this in more depth.
Yeah. So Refusing to Be a Man, the book, is the result of second wave feminism, but the waves are kind of dangerous. They're slippery slopes. So the wave premise, kind of like the word punk itself, right? Like the punks didn't call themselves punks first. Some newspaper did that, or I don't know, McLaren or whatever. But the waves were actually an attempt by second wave feminists to give themselves some sort of historical authority. The word feminism wasn't really used until around 1910. It was used a little bit in the 1800s in France, but not for the same purposes, not to the same degree as an umbrella. And the second wave feminists that kind of took that up and used the term really strongly kind of co-opted the work of the suffragettes. Called them feminists, even though they didn't call themselves that. And it was really an appeal to authority. So the waves themselves are problems. People just decide. There's actually an article called I Am the Third Wave. People just decide when the waves change. But it's problematic. It's problematic because it kind of hides the difference that's always existed in feminism. I compare it, I like analogies, not shit soup like Chris.
Right.
But analogies. So hockey, right? That's something that everyone probably that listens to this podcast has heard about. We can call something hockey, and we can say, hockey when it was still rock'em sock'em. We can move forward to like the Gary Bettman years. We can say modern hockey post, all of the strikes, but it's really all still hockey. There's no like direct, line that says this is what, right? And likewise within hockey, we can all be playing the same sport, but have different approaches, different plays, different strengths, different weaknesses. And feminism is like that. So what is called the first wave of feminism is actually the suffragette movement, the attempt to get the vote. Black women were involved in North America, but really they didn't get the vote legally in America till the 60s. They got it a little bit before, but there was all kinds of like barriers put up to them actually achieving their vote, more so than is today. So it was the 60s, 50 years later, that Black women got the vote. Second wave feminism came back or started, and there was kind of three main branches. So there was the socialist feminists who were Marxists. They believed that class was the cause of this. Women needed to create a labor force and maintain the labor force, and it was this class inequality that really maintained the difference of gender. And then there was liberal feminists, my least favorite, who believed that the system could be reformed, that through legal lobbying and protest and working within the system, that women could get more rights. When people talk about white feminism, they often talk about liberal feminism. That's what they're talking about. This idea that the system isn't as broken as we say it is, it can be changed. And then there's radical feminism, and radical feminism is everything else. So it's all of the stuff that doesn't believe that the system can be reformed, that doesn't want to limit it to just class differentiation. Andrea Dworkin was a radical feminist, and her partner, John Stoltenberg, who wrote Refusing to Be a Man, they believed that sex was problematic. So, pornography, sexual relations, compulsory heterosexuality, the desire, the need to be heterosexual in order to take part in society, they kind of focused their arguments around that. So, early on, and Dworkin did take it back as she got older. She walked it back, but she said, that all sex was rape. And there's a line, I think, if you listen to Chris's podcast, he says that originally one of the lines that he wanted to say was "Dead men don't rape."
Right.
And he doesn't remember why he said that. So I can clarify that a little bit.
Yeah, that'd be great, because so we're recording our interview after Keith and I have recorded the actual episode conversation itself. So like, people will have heard me sort of go over these waves in the beginning of this episode, but I'm loving now that people have heard that, and now we can complicate that a little bit. So now, and we didn't get into a lot about the dead men don't rape line, and I do want to know what you have to say about that. So this is great. Keep going.
So the idea was that Andrea Dworkin believed, to a large degree, that rape was inevitable. And she has a quote, I can read it to you. Under patriarchy, no woman is safe to live her life or to love or to mother children. Under patriarchy, every woman is a victim, past, present, and future. Under patriarchy, every woman's daughter is a victim, past, present, or future. Under patriarchy, every woman's son is her potential betrayer and also the inevitable rapist or exploiter of another woman. So she believed, and not surprising considering her history, she was raped. She was sexually assaulted while she was in prison for a while. She was in an abusive heterosexual relationship. Her marriage to Stoltenberg was actually non-physical. They were married, they were life partners, they loved each other, but they were both out and queer.
Right.
So it's not surprising, given her history, that she would see sex as violence and violence as inevitable from sex. Again, she walked that back. But the idea is that, she believed that there could be no heterosexual relationships without violence, because the violence was inherent due to patriarchy. And so the only men who aren't guilty of being part of that violence, whether, intentional or not, are dead men. She's wrong. I mean, I think she's clearly wrong. There are lots of men who are feminists. There are lots of men who do their best to avoid violence, and certainly you can have sex without, it being rapey. But given her personal experience, you could see where that might, come in, right? And so that was her radical feminism. But there's also radical feminists like Bell Hooks, who was brilliant. She argued that feminism couldn't exist without also being anti-racist and anti-oppressive and anti-classist. She called it the white supremacist capitalist patriarchy that we were fighting. And she argued that by deconstructing one, so deconstructing gender or sexism, deconstructing capitalism, you inherently had to take everything kind of apart at the same time. So she thought that feminism, she has a book called Feminism is for Everybody. And it's a really straightforward book that almost anyone can read. It's not too expensive if people are interested. But she talks about kind of this overview of where feminism has been and where it needs to go. If people are interested, I guess. I hope you're interesting.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
Excellent. So, I'm just thinking about some of the lines in this song. What really jumps out at you as far as the lines in the song that you really find provocative or thoughtful, that you wanted to elaborate on?
Yeah, I love that the first two lines are basically, I'm not trying to tell you them different from all the rest. I've been subjected to the same constructions of desired, felt the same effects. That's basically saying yes, all men, like hashtag yes, all men, right? So, his newer songs, like on Victory Lap, they say, say not all cops, say not all men.
Yeah.
But it is all men. And it's not that all men are necessarily violent. It's that all men are subjected to patriarchy. So, it's a problem that comes up a lot, right? We talk about in a class, there's this post-structuralist feminist. Her name is Jasper Puar, P-U-A-R. And she has an article where she deconstructs a situation. There's a Super Bowl game going on, and during the course of the Super Bowl game, something occurs, and the identified man hits the identified woman. But instead of describing it in terms of individual blame, she talks about it, and I think she's actually quoting someone else. She talks about it in terms of it being a bunch of affect, a bunch of like, this thing affects this thing, affects this thing. So I don't know if everyone's aware, but like domestic violence skyrockets during Super Bowl weekend. and she's just talking about how it's not individual choice. It's not like a conscious, I am going to go out there and be an asshole. It's all of these things in our lives, whether it's like what we see on TV, what happened, today at work, what we were told as a child, all of these things come together and they create or they affect us. And a lot of people are really uncomfortable with that reading, feminists included, because they want someone to blame, right? Mm-hmm. They don't want it to be something that's like amorphous and out and systematic. They want it to be like, this is the thing we can fix.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's Dworkin's issue, right? She points to pornography, or she points to men, but that's not the problem. The problem isn't that men are bad. It's that patriarchy limits women and men. Neither men nor women, or anyone who identifies outside of that binary, which is a whole other discussion, can be their fullest authentic selves if there's this category of this ideal of men, right?
Yeah.
I think it's Keith that has the Classical Ideas podcast.
That's me.
Oh, is it you? So Plato's ideal, right? Like this idea, like there's no such thing as an ideal apple. No matter how many orchards you go to, you're not going to find this ideal. And yet we have an entire system that constructs a man and a woman in this ideal that neither can actually ever hope to, embody, because that's not how life works.
Yeah, and something that was so interesting to me when I started digging into the book Refusing to Be a Man itself, it presents itself as a liberation theory for men.
Yeah.
And like that sounds so counterintuitive when you think about the fact that it's a patriarchal society where men have these unearned, ingrained advantages that they've inherited across centuries and centuries. And then I was like, holy smokes, like that is so interesting to talk about liberating the people who are effectively oppressing everybody else. And I'm just like, it's a mental like gymnastics thing that I've had to go through to understand that there is a lot of liberation that men actually do need so that we can like move beyond this into a future where life is better for all people. And it was really confusing to me to understand that he was talking about a liberation theory for men. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's super confusing because when you set up a binary, right, like dark and light, on or off, man or woman, you create these archetypes of what, these limits of what people can be. So it doesn't matter if you were born with a penis and are super into art and like emotiveness and, you want to be like a community-oriented talker. It doesn't matter because you're not allowed to cry. You're not allowed to be emotive. You have to prove that you can dominate. That's what it means to be a man, according to this category, this box. And, if men are dominant and dominating, sure, alpha males dominate other men, but like, who are these men dominating? And the answer is, the other half of the binary, women. And likewise, women's submissiveness is only relevant in relationship to this concept of men. So there's nothing wrong with being like high testosterone, like super assertive, wanting to wrestle on the ground or be physical. There's nothing wrong with that. It's not the action or the identity that's the problem. It's the category that precedes life. So, it's one thing for us to create language so that we can communicate ideas with each other and have better relationships, ideally. Another one is ideals that might not ever exist, but it's a whole thing altogether to say, like, you, new human who has no experience, you're a tabula rasa, a blank slate, you are now going to, because of the genitalia you have, act like this. These are the things you will value. These are the spaces you will inhabit. And that's, I think, what refusing to be a man is. It's not refusing to be masculine.
Right.
It's not refusing to be, into sports or whatever you perceive as your, maleness. It is refusing to embody a category that doesn't make sense for people and is the opposite end. If you refuse to be a man, I can refuse to be a woman. And James Baldwin, who was friends with Stoltenberg, he said that. He said, if you insist on being white, then I have no choice than to be black. So there's all kinds of really complex ideas. And of course, feminism's moved forward. Now, like, I'm really into affect theory and post-structuralism.
Yeah.
That's my gag. But like, feminism is very different, and it's not just for women. It's not just, radical feminism isn't just anti-pornography, anti-sex work, anti-sex. It's also, we want to break down the system. We recognize that the system is patriarchal and capitalist and racist and transphobic and Western centric. And we don't think that power dynamic is healthy or something we should consider. I had one other thought on the lyrics, if you want to hear
tell
that. Me. So the other line that I think I commented on one of the podcast thing when I went back through a catastrophic break with consensus reality, but there were questions about what it means to revisit eroticism or to redefine eroticism.
Yeah, say more on that.
Yeah, so at the time, Stoltenberg was probably basing it on Audre Lorde, although I don't know that for sure. There's nothing that says that. But Audre Lorde has a bit of an obsession. She has a speech that you can listen to. She's quite a great speaker, called The Erotic as Power. And if people want that, I can give you a link or whatever. But basically what she says is that the erotic is more than just a physical sensation. So, when we think of eroticism now, probably most of us would think of like something to do with sex or consumption or sexiness. But the erotic is bigger than that. The erotic is, according to Lorde and to Stoltenberg, it's the ability to kind of feel, to open yourself up to feeling. And so, of course, that relates to sex. It's, you feel stuff, but it's not just the physical, like I am going to dominate you, or I am going to have this physical sensation and have no meaning behind it. I'm not going to be unmindful about it. The erotic is for you to really recognize who you are and what you're feeling and how this matters to you. So, sure, consumption, sex, food, they can be erotic, but so can, the sensation of like being at your favorite band's rock show and being like flooded by that emotion, or recognizing your sense of community. And Audre Lorde says that the erotic has been kind of warped by the patriarchy. And she does talk about, she's a second wave feminist. She does talk about how the erotic has been kind of commodified as porn. So all these people, I think we recognize this in society, right? With like mental health issues skyrocketing and people feeling disconnected even before the pandemic. We have this lack of sense that we like belong, that we can connect, that we can kind of really have any meaning in our lives. And we try to replace that with like Amazon orders and Netflix and stuff. But it's that loss of the erotic. It's the disconnection of the erotic and the transformation of the erotic into something that only happens through what we see as like sex through porn or on TV or these kind of warped ideas of what relationships look like.
Interesting. Well, Mary, I'm wondering if you have any suggestions on what you think that listeners should look at next, read next, any suggestions that you have if people want to use this as sort of a springboard into a little bit more of their own learning. Where would you suggest they go after this?
Well, like I said, the Bell Hooks book is really great. Anything by Bell Hooks is going to be interesting. She's a Black feminist who self-identifies as radical. Her book, Feminism is for Everybody, is a really great kind of overarching description of feminism up till about 2000 when it was published. That Audre Lorde, The Power of the Erotic, is a really great listen. But honestly, the most important thing I think you can do is to just recognize the places where you take for granted that gender is a thing. Gender is a social construction, like almost everything else. And they talk about that in the song too, right? How you've been constructed. Language is a social construction. We made these things up. So when your first impulse is to say, no, that's not the way it is, or to get uncomfortable because of, I don't know, someone requesting pronouns, or when you see somebody that's doing something that you think is not appropriate for their gender, just question why it is that you have such strong feelings about like what a probable stranger is doing with their lives and not hurting somebody, right?
Yeah.
It's really important.
Awesome. Well, Mary, I'm super grateful to you for doing this with me, for reaching out, and for your sincere interest in this particular song, and for, dropping a little bit more information on us. Something I always try to do with this show is to give everybody 100% of what I can possibly give as far as content in relation to the song. And I just knew that we had to talk a little bit more about this. So, I'm just really grateful to you for your interest, your time, your energy, and just sneaking in this last minute interview with me before we put out the Refusing to Be a Man episode.
I'm excited to hear it. It is one of the more important songs in the repertoire for me because it was an aha moment.
Awesome. Well, Mary, thank you so much for being here. It's been a real pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Have a good day. Good drive home.
Mary Best, welcome back to Unscripted Moments, a podcast about propaganda.
Welcome back to the conversation about feminism.
Indeed. Thank you so much. I'm here to learn. I'm very excited. I love learning. It's my favorite thing, and I hope to learn forever. So we'll go ahead and do some of that now. Mary, how has life been since we last had you on the show back for the Refusing to Be a Man episode?
It's been good. That's the hesitant voice. It's been fine. I've been busy. I'm back in school. I took a bunch of classes over the summer, and I don't know if I'll ever leave school. Much like you, I'll learn forever, but I just really wish I was spending less money doing it.
Yeah. I get to learn from you. You pay to learn, and then I learn from you for free and take your valuable time, and I don't pay you for it other than hopefully good company. Yeah.
It's actually important to me. So I'm pretty anti-academia. I hope people don't. Oops, professors, if you're listening. I just find the whole ivory tower thing a bit ridiculous, and I find that the kind of false differentiation between the experiences of people and what happens in academia problematic, and also the fact that it's pay gated, that people don't listen to people of color. I mean, it's getting better, but academia has a lot of privilege that they don't acknowledge often, and gender studies is like the kid sister that everyone ignores.
Yeah, well, and like so I have like another area of academic interest that I have where I do a different podcast and I interview professors from the humanities, mostly in like religion and philosophy, and they get their budgets gutted endlessly. People who are tenured, like all of a sudden they're like being threatened with like loss of job and things like that. Departments are being eliminated, and it's just like out of nowhere, just because like of some arbitrary invented bottom line kind of thing. And it's a really confusing world that I constantly am hearing stories about. And it makes me grateful that I kind of went a different path in my life,
Yeah, but I like the library access. I should just buy the library access, but that's what I really want, is access to all of the things I want to read, not so much the classes, but some of them are good.
Well, Mary, how did it feel knowing that people requested you to come back on the show and hang out with us again?
It's lovely. Thank you, everyone. I don't usually worry too much about whether people like that I'm talking or not. I do it anyway. So it's nice to have people that actually want to hear me ruining their day.
I love it. Well, so Mary, we're going to do something a little special for a couple of episodes. So we're going to talk about 2 songs in this conversation, and then I'm going to divide them into a couple of different episodes. So the conversation that we're going to record now will be essentially a part 1 and a part 2, which people will be able to hear across 2 episodes. And those episodes are Fuck Machine from How to Clean Everything and Ladies Nite in Loserville from Today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes. So we're going to start with Fuck Machine, and I'm curious in general how you feel about the record How to Clean Everything from 1993, because I've been very vocal about it on the podcast that it's my least favorite propaganda record by a significant margin. And, I get some pushback on that, which is fine. That's all part of the fun. But I'm curious about your take on this record, because I specifically asked you to talk about this song, and I'm wondering how you feel about the record, because you did not choose this. I asked you to be here.
That's true. For those of you who weren't in the conversation with Greg and I, he sent me a message asking me to talk about this song, and I was like, just give me a second. I don't know what that song is.
It's true.
I I have listened to How to Clean Everything a handful of times max in my life. It's right up there with Rush, which I'm sure Chris will be happy about, but I can't stand it. It's very, and I think they're pretty vocal about this, the band. It's very fat records, which I also don't like, except for Me First and the Gimme Gimmes. Big fan of those
Nice.
guys. But yeah, I don't particularly like the record. I find it's kind of fakery a little bit, and again, Chris has talked about that, the fact that he's pretense of vocals or something going on there.
Sure.
But I mean, it's not the poppiness. I just generally don't really find it listenable. Let the hate begin. It's fine.
Yeah, well, I know what you mean though about that, because to me, when I listen to the record, sometimes I don't hear Chris's authentic voice. I hear authenticity within the words and the message, but I don't feel as much authenticity within his performance, because I feel like he was almost being pushed in a certain direction to sing and sound in a certain way that was common at the time. But then later on, obviously, he goes on to find his voice, which then to me is a far more authentic performance vocally, because it's how he actually sounds without adding some kind of flair on top of it, you know?
Yeah, and we were talking earlier, and I was like, it's like people who aren't from Alabama putting the twang on, and I just don't enjoy that. But I do like, I mean, I don't, so I really don't like the record overall as a product, but I do like that you can kind of hear some of the things that come later for the band, some of the things that are great. So the cadence of the way that the lyrics sit on top of the music, and the fact that like sentences don't finish as sentences, and there's kind of highlights on specific words, that stuff carries through to today. And I think that it's interesting just to look back and see kind of the evolution of the band, and that like some of the things I really love about them now, including their politics, are, you know, carry through. But yeah, it's not a record that I listen to.
Well, interestingly,
or recognize songs from.
well, Mary, as you know, I went to Winnipeg recently because you and I were messaging on Instagram and stuff while I was on my trip. And I do have to tell you that they played 0 songs from How to Clean Everything at all 3 shows. There was not a single How to Clean Everything moment in the entire 3-day weekend, which, you know, I was, a lot of people would be really heartbroken about that, but I was into it the entire time. So it's just kind of a funny experience to host a podcast about propaganda and be totally fine with not a single song appearing in 3 shows in a row in their hometown. I was just thinking about that constantly. Like, I'm so okay with this. And I wonder how many people in the room are just like waiting for Anti-Manifesto the entire weekend. You know what I mean? And it just never arrived. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so like gutsy.
Yeah, and that playlist, I mean, I listened to your episode. I watched your episode. I did not watch anything. I listened to your episode, and I did, you know, check out the playlist that you were posting. And those playlists look amazing, and I wish I'd been there. But everyone thinks the East Coast is in Ontario. No one comes here. Hint, hint, hint.
Gotcha. Well, so let's get into this song. Do you care if we just kind of like go through the lyrics a little bit and kind of break it down? Because there's a lot going on here, and I want to pick your brain as specifically as you are able to discuss it. And if that means we go through it sort of like in a line by line fashion, I'm definitely okay with that. So we've got these lyrics written, contextualized, like written like 92, 93. And you know, we talked a little bit about the eras of feminism on the Refusing to Be a Man episode. You and I went into that, and then Keith and I went into it in quite painstaking detail without.
It's good.
Thank you. It was really hard work for me to for me to do that. Like, it was really hard. I tried so hard. And I'm curious if you can sort of set the time and place of this song. So we're thinking 92, 93. And I'm wondering what was going on in that era of feminist thinking, just to kind of like tell us about that era of time that may have inspired Chris so much in this particular song before we get into the lyrics themselves.
Yeah. So the late 80s, and maybe the first year or 2 of the 90s. I know I don't like the wave metaphor, for those of you who heard Less Talk, More Rock, or Refusing to Be a Man when I was on there. The wave metaphor is so problematic, and I hate using it, but unfortunately, it's what most people relate to in terms of contextualizing. So in the late 80s, early 90s, it was kind of the end of that second wave, which again, for those who didn't listen to that episode, was kind of the first real feminist movement. The original wave, what they call the first wave, was just the right to vote for suffragettes. It was mostly white women that got the vote in North America. But the second wave was really what we think of as feminism, kind of the kernel of that. So women's liberation in terms of primarily reproductive rights, so abortion, the right to access healthcare without asking your father or your husband for permission, which went on in North America. I'm not sure of the exact dates, but I mean, in my lifetime, women had to request permission to get medical procedures involving reproductive rights from the men in their lives. Which it's yeah, I know it's funny now, but I mean it's literally only within the last 30 years.
No, I'm laughing out of like despair, honestly.
Yes, well, that's what I mean. Like it's something that we're like, really, that's insane, but it's 30 years ago, 30 maybe 40. So it was abortion rights, it was reproductive rights generally, it was the right to access to the political sphere. 1993 is the first prime minister in Canada who is a woman. 1993 was the year that Ruth Bader Ginsburg was brought to the Supreme Court. The second woman on the American Supreme Court, but the first self-declared feminist.
Okay.
There was about 6 countries in the entire world with female identified prime ministers or presidents, leaders. So there was a lot of political power, a lot of organizing for political power happening. That was a big thing. There was also some negative stuff, but we'll skip that. And by negative stuff, I mean like retraction of rights. The post-Reagan era in America, the Reagan era was terrible. Post-Reagan was trying to get back some rights that the right wing kind of took away. So it was really just about those. And then it was about, the right to self-identify, self-declarations, and just to have lives that were not attached to men. So those were the real arguments. 5 years before, Andrea Dworkin and Catherine McKinnon would have been considered fringe. But by this point, they were kind of the mainstream and people really heard their feminist arguments. So again, going back to that earlier episode, that was like anti-pornography, very much anti kind of blatant sexuality. So in some ways, fear of heterocentric, relationships and organizations. So there was some political lesbianism. But generally, by the time we get to the early 1990s, a lot of people who had identified with wanting women's rights to move forward would not identify as feminists. So they wanted women's rights. They wanted to push for these things, political power, kind of personal decision-making and reproductive rights, but they didn't want to call themselves feminists because there was a backlash that happened. And the backlash is kind of the whole song. Really. Fuck Machine is kind of the repressive feminism. I don't think they actually called themselves that. But repressive feminism is what I'm going to call it. It was their kind of stance. And again, it doesn't surprise me that the band would have written about this because they already kind of proved that was the feminism that they had access to, was this kind of anti-pornography, anti-sex or hesitancy around sex kind of stuff. So there was lots happening, but it was mostly white women. It was liberal feminism that primarily kind of took the stage. And, it was the beginning of the third wave. So a lot of Kimberly Crenshaw shortly thereafter, if not just a little before, around that time, she was positing the importance of intersectionality, which is like still a buzzword in feminism. Intersectionality is the idea that we can't just talk about gender. We also have to talk about the other identifying characteristics. So race, class, whether you're cisgendered or not, heteronormativity, your sexuality, all of these things need to be talked about because the experience of myself as like a Black, straight, cis, grew up poor, mentally well person is going to be very different than a person who is white, but maybe queer and grew up affluent. So we had to talk about how those different things intersected. So that was becoming popular, but it wasn't part of the mainstream. We were still having this argument internally, and I think that's what Fuck Machine is, whether or not they intended that. The internal argument of feminists about whether or not people should be able to be free in their sexuality and should be kind of out there and promiscuous if they wanted to, and show skin if they wanted to, and make sexual decisions and decisions about their sexual health for themselves, or whether they should, stand back from that because the patriarchy would objectify them if they did something else.
Yeah, this is a song that I really have a lot of mixed feelings about, because I almost feel like it almost like scared me into like shyness, because like it made me feel like I couldn't say things, and made me feel like nervous about, relationships in general, because I didn't want to come across as being disrespectful. So almost in a way, like, if I read this and I was like listening to this song over and over and over when I was like 14 or 15, I almost think that this made me almost a worse communicator with like the women in my life. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and Camille Paglia, who is not my favorite feminist, she's like the worst. Not literally the worst. I don't mean to judge. But she actually says that because of the inability for people to like talk without worrying about hurting people's feelings or stepping on toes, we no longer, and because of technology, she argues, because of social media and whatnot, we no longer actually know how to read each other's body language. So we don't know how to have conversations, because we're always worried so much about what other people will think about, or about what the social conversation is, about the overarching kind of social norms, and not about like the person in front of us and what they want, feel, need, are expressing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But she's right about that. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting
Wrong
too,
about
because
a bunch of other things.
because like you lose so much tone and expression and body language, and like the way the voice flows, and like the way that like people like engage with each other interpersonally, and then somebody says one sentence on the internet in type, lacking all of those other expressive modalities of communication, and then all of a sudden they're a horrible person who is putting themselves up for being attacked from many sides. And it's a really confusing thing to feel. And so let's get into lyrics a little bit. We've got this first line. It's something physical. It's a conditioned reaction. It's something physical. It's a conditioned attraction. And I don't really understand about the conditioned part, because to me, if people have a sexuality in general, then it would feel much more natural than the very conditioned aspect that the opening line leads in with. And I'm wondering what your take on the use of like conditioned is in this opening line.
Yeah, that's again back to refusing to be a man when they say, oh my God, so I'm a terrible propaganda fan. This isn't nature, this is nurturing.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the exact same argument. So again, Camille Paglia, this is where I disagree with her. She actually disagrees with the kind of generally accepted, and again, there's constantly back and forth kind of discourse about whether or not one thing or another is true, and about a certain tool versus another tool in the kind of struggle for women's liberation and gender liberation. But she says that people are naturally, that gender is natural, that gender is something that people just have happen to them. She argues a bunch of stuff about like hormones, and that hormones affect the body, which is true, obviously. I think especially now, I've had so much experience with trans people, and as they're taking hormones, they are drastically changing physically, emotionally, mentally, right? Puberty, we look at people going through puberty, we know that hormones impact people. But she argues that that's kind of like the main thing. And she says that like if you look around the world, there's worldwide gendered behaviors and gendered norms. And so how can that happen globally if it's conditioned, if it's something that we are taught to do by our culture? So two things about that. One, globally is kind of a sketchy thing right now, because we are so interconnected, even on a global scale, because of capitalism and because of the shared pop culture and traveling, we're so much more connected than we've ever been. And so, of course, it's hard to say whether or not that's nature or nurture based on global situations now. But also, just because we all like built shelter around the world doesn't mean that we are like, naturally, that shelter is natural, and it's a choice. And how we build shelter and where we build shelter, those are choices, and how we interact with our environment. And I would argue that gender is very similar. Gender is not sexuality, to be clear. Sexuality is who you're attracted to. Gender is what you feel you are. So it's a bit of a different conversation, but I mean, people ask me all the time, we have conversations like, what's your gender and what's your pronouns? And I'm like, I say she, her, but only because I don't really care. Like, I don't think about it. I don't think of myself as Black and, Nova Scotian and I don't know, my grandmother's Ukrainian. Like, I don't think about myself in those terms. I think of myself as Mary, right? So like, I don't really have any issues with those labels until the world decides to put pressure on me, or I put pressure on the world. It's affect. I've said that before as well. I like affect theory, the idea we're affected by the world around us and the way that we live. So conditioning is the idea that society kind of creates gender because of the way that we interact with each other, the way that we're taught to interact with each other, the way that children are raised, the way that they see their parents and the adults in their lives living, and they mimic that. And what's interesting is that culture creates us, but we also create culture. So there's pushback against that. People, people aren't completely victimized by culture. People, obviously, things have changed. So people are not slaves to conditioning, but they are conditioned. We are conditioned. So in terms of sexuality conditioning, you might be fairly clear that you're not cis, sorry, that's gender, that you're, queer in some way, that you're interested in the opposite sex, same sex, you're not sexual, whatever. You might be pretty clear on that, but how you're attracted to those people is conditioned. So if we look at, paintings, things that are, I say paintings because it's kind of the closest thing to TV or whatever that was popular. If you look at paintings from like the 1600s, the bodies that were being drawn and recorded are not the same bodies that we would want to highlight according to today's culture.
Right.
The things that we're interested in, the things that we find appealing aren't the same because culture changes and it conditions us to change. The dad bod thing was being talked about a couple of years ago. I'm so old that I was like born old, so I don't really get pop culture stuff sometimes, but the dad bod thing was a thing. So like, I'm willing to bet that a lot of guys think of themselves, in terms of like whether or not they're attractive based on whether or not they're muscular or they work out or they have some sort of like physical prowess. I don't know, but I'm not a dude. That said, a lot of women a couple of years ago were saying like, no, the dad bod thing is in, right? So there's a bit of confusion about, what we think, what we're conditioned to believe is interesting, but also what we're conditioned to actually find appealing. And there's shame when they don't meet up. So if you're attracted to something or someone, but something in someone that doesn't fit the kind of social norm, there's shame around that. And you can push back against the shame and be happy. Or you can, or find happiness, hopefully, or you can kind of internalize that shame. And then again, that's a conditioned response. So you're not being who you want to be or who you maybe really are. You're not making the most of your own potential because you're being conditioned to repress that. And that again is about the song.
Yeah, well, and then it's got that flows nicely into the next line too, because it talks about shame, right? It addresses this feeling of shame that he is feeling. It says, but have I finally escaped when my eyes no longer rape the innocent women, children, human beings, seeing the pain that it brings, shallow, superficial decisions, real beauty obscured by my tunnel vision. So he's addressing the shame that he feels. And, I'm wondering what your take on that line is too, because it's that flows so well from what you're just saying.
Yeah. And shame is so useless. It's so useless. most emotions, in my opinion, are super useful. Anger, frustration, all the ones that we consider negative, for the most part, are useful. They're telling us that we need to do something. They're trying to push us forward to something. But shame is really about an inability to, like I said, create kind of resonance between what you want and who you are and what society is telling you should be, or what you think you should be.
Yeah.
And I think that's a conversation that really is important for this song, because feminists of the time were arguing kind of from two positions. And I had a quote somewhere, so much paper. Feminists were arguing from two positions. There was the feminists who've been working since the 60s and 70s to push back against restrictive healthcare practices and restricted access to political sphere, restricted access to like the public sphere, where it was like women didn't just have to stay home, more interest in men and people of other genders actually caring for children in a way that wasn't like, oh, you're babysitting your own child. So the women who were kind of pushing back against like this 50s artificial post-war, everything has to be super normal, gender binary is really intense, poodle skirts and, makeup while doing dishes. The people who are pushing back against that were pushing back for the right to make their own decisions about their own sexuality and their own sexual health. And so then they come across these new feminists, the kind of next generation, who maybe never experienced that 50s repression, which culturally, I think we believe that was like actually how things were for a long time. But that 50s repression was really only about the post-war trying to bring normalcy to vets returning home. But anyway, so a lot of the newer feminists, let's say feminists of the 80s that were coming of age in the 80s, maybe late 70s, they were, saying like, no, like I don't want to be sexually objectified. I don't want to be, I don't want to put myself in a position where people can just objectify me. So I want to be a little bit more repressed. So not really 70s, more 80s, coming out of like the hippies. Don't like talking about hippies. The hippies and like the free love, whatever. And then people were saying, but a lot of people that said that they were into free love, that they were really interested in, being in equal, open sexual relationships, those people were taken advantage of. Those women were raped and harmed and used. And so we don't want that. So we're creating limits on where our sexuality begins and ends. We're, being a little more professional, like the terrible clothes in the 80s was like the big shoulder pads and big kind of masculine pants. And so these things were coming up in direct relation to damage that have been done when the patriarchy reasserted itself on the changes that feminists before that had come up with. And this might make noise. I have a quote. So it says, the restrictions placed on female agency, especially through the institution of marriage, which women entered younger and were less enfranchised to leave than now, are staggering to imagine. Britain didn't actually make marital rape legal until 1991, and that's actually a really close number for North America as well. So for feminists who survived that generation, it seemed extraordinary to have battled such risk for liberation, to hear younger women discuss sexual contract, a desire for boundaries, a wish not to be sexualized by the men in their lives. Given the emergence of their generation from socially enforced cocoons of sexual repression, where actual laws existed to culturally erase women's sexuality, it must look like regress to older women. So what had happened in the intervening decades is that sexual freedom had become another realm of women's experience that patriarchy conquered. And so this song comes directly, I think, out of that, where the conversation is, should you be overtly sexual? Should you show shoulder on the news when you're anchoring, or should you be wearing your very large shoulder pad, shirts and looking masculine and professional? And what are the risks of either side? But it was a conversation that was happening. Then there was a little bit of like cattiness to the conversation, but not nearly as much. Most of the conversation was women and other feminists trying to figure out how to best proceed, what was best for them, what was best for women. It wasn't you're wrong. It wasn't, a fight. It was a discourse. So should women just be sexual and say, fuck the patriarchy, this is who I am and this is what I am, and you need to accept that? Or should women protect themselves? Should women not be going to frat parties? Should women not drink? Should women not go out after dark? I land on the side of fuck the patriarchy, but lots of women who are maybe in less safe situations than I've been in, or who are less, like, I'm 6 feet tall. I grew up in a family that fights or taught us to fight. I'm happy. Like, I played football. Like, I don't concern myself when I'm walking down the street that some guy is going to hurt me. I'm more likely to hurt them. I've studied anatomy. But that said, yes, the punching. I have a punching bag in there that I kicked so hard. I don't know if I said this. I kicked it so hard that it's falling off.
I have a friend who has uppercutted men in bars before, and I asked her about it. I was like, "Hey, have you ever like punched a guy in a bar?" She goes, "Oh yeah, I uppercutted a guy so hard that I heard his teeth click together, and then his eyes rolled back in his head. Then he hit his head on a pool table." And I was like, "Amazing!" So I get it.
So women like us, I'm just going to include your friend in this, don't worry as much about getting hurt, because we are privileged enough to have been taught to defend ourselves and to take up presence, to be comfortable with being present. My niece is a foot shorter than me, and she's never been taught to fight. She doesn't have, she's a dancer, so she's very strong, and I think that she could defend herself, but I could understand her being a little more afraid. So it's not my place to judge whether you want to be very physical and sexual, and whether you want to be out and kind of showing body parts and being fashionable in that way, or if you want to wear turtlenecks and blazers and, wear your keys or a whistle around your neck. Like, it's not my place to judge that, but that was the discourse. That was the conversation. And that conversation did become a little bit bitter. So there was a couple of people like Paglia who kind of said, like, fuck you guys, women and men are women and men. It is not conditioned. It is absolutely nature. It is our hormones. She argued, again, there's a lot I disagree with her. She argued that men are inherently, because of their testosterone, hunters. They are aggressive and assertive, and they go out into the world. And she said, if the world was run by women, like feminists suggest, we would still be living in grass huts. I know. She's a feminist. She's a professor who teaches feminism currently. She also said that women, though, don't lack for aggression. It just shows up in a different place. And how it shows up, I forget the exact word she says, but basically she argued that it shows up in like super attached motherhood. So like, protecting one's young, creating those really close relationships with children, and being a little bit like envious or, protective of that relationship, even I assume in adults. So that was her argument. She said that not conditioned, this whole feminism thing is actually creating something called victim feminism, where all women are being conditioned to believe that they are weak and incapable, and to believe that the world owes them something, and that they have no responsibility for their own safety. So that was a conversation that was happening with, Catherine McKinnon was on actually the other side of that. And it was just back and forth. People were saying it. So that's the conditioned thing. Like, is there nature that makes us, inherently, like, am I inherently supposed to feel motherly about stuff? Is that is that real? I do have feelings that might be considered motherly, but I'm also like, I love my dog. That doesn't mean that I want like 17 kids and sole responsibility for them. I care about people, right? And likewise, I like to go into the woods, and I don't hunt because vegan, but but I hunt for mushrooms. I like to go and take care of my own business.
Well, what's really interesting about like the next little bit here is that we have this like these like contrasting. We have this anchor on the news, right? Where the anchor is like saying like the whole boys will be boys thing, and then sitting back and like going, gee golly shucks. But then in the next scene, exploding with the I'm not your fucking toy. And so there's this shift among the character that is presented within the song. And I'm just wondering about your thoughts on that part too, because we have this like acceptance and then this explosion. And I found this part to be really interesting.
I think that there's a couple things about that. Number one, like I'm currently, no one can see me, but I have like red hair and I'm wearing lipstick. If you see me in 3 hours, I will be covered in like paint and jogging pants will be on. My hair will still be red, but but you know, I think people have a desire to express themselves in the moment in whatever way that they want to express themselves. And I think that on television, I never did television, although I was on Much Music. Don't look that up. It was bad. But I've done radio and I've done other media, like band media related things. There is this really intense pressure from up above. Anyone who's in a band even will know this, with label pressure, to conform to a certain standard. And I think not Less Talk, More Rock, How to Clean Everything. Chris in Catastrophic Break with Consensus Reality has talked about that pressure from like Fat Mike to do and to be.
To sing a certain way.
Yeah, exactly. So that pressure exists for everyone. I think it's just capitalism. Something's made money before, we want to use it to make money again. But when you take on a job in the public sphere, generally, there's an expectation that you're going to look and sound a certain way and that you're going to represent certain ideas. Whether or not they are what you agree with doesn't really matter. You're signing a contract that says you're going to represent the company in this way. So for women in the 90s, there was a bit of a weird thing happening where up until around when the record came out, maybe just before, women were still wearing like suits. So they were wearing, you know, I don't know, skirts or pants and like a blazer and a like regular dress shirt. They looked very much like, you know, slightly more curvy versions of the male anchors that were on there. And then at some point, and I think it was Fox, but maybe I just want to blame Fox for things. So don't quote that. But at some point in the time, people started deciding that women could wear sleeveless shift dresses and in color. And the marketing teams decided that that would sell more commercials. Basically, it would make more viewership come about because sex sells and bright colors are more interesting, more visually interesting. And it bought into like the power feminism that was coming about as a result of the reaction to victim feminism. Power feminism is also problematic solely because it argues that like we've done what we need to do, we have the power that we wanted, and now we should just stop talking about feminism. So we're wearing dresses. But interestingly enough, some studies that were done in the early 90s and since actually say that when women wear clothing that shows off their figure, all viewers actually listen to what they say less. So people will watch more often, you'll get more viewers, but they don't actually absorb what's being read, and that's or read out on the teleprompter, and that's actually across the board. Now men have a slightly higher ratio for that, but that's across the board. So interestingly, you know, we started doing this to sell the news, but then people are actually getting less out of the news, according to those studies. Katie Couric, though, a name that people might recognize, she's I think she worked for Condé Nast forever, but she's like a popular name.
Very popular. Yeah, everybody knows her down here.
Yeah. She actually thinks that it makes people look less professional to wear anything other than a suit. So there's that argument as well. And here's the thing: every person of every gender is going to come across this pressure to conform to whatever standards the company it is you work for. You work for a school. I'm sure you have a dress code and you know, obligations of what you can and cannot speak to with your students. I also wear really obnoxious clothes to work and have a company line to toe. But for women, it's extra complicated because no matter what women do, they can't win.
Right.
So if you wear the suit and, you know, then it's like, oh, you have no personality. People will say you're trying to be a man. There will be arguments that, you know, you're too uptight. You'll get the feminazi title, which we can talk about later. But if you wear the dress, then it's like, oh, you're wearing the dress to get ahead. You don't have anything to talk about. You just want to look good. So there's no way to win whether you toe the company line or don't, whether you dress in one way or the other. So I can imagine this character, and I don't know if when they wrote it, they were talking about like a specific issue or a specific incident. I couldn't find anything
I
when
may
looked
have
it
to.
up.
I'm trying to find it too, but
Yeah,
there's not a lot of
I,
information out there about this song.
I don't know that there is actually an incident. I think it's just it was a conversation that was happening in the kind of public sphere. But if you're constantly towing this line, and you're wearing what they tell you to wear, and you're saying what they tell you to say, and you're doing it every night, there's two things that happen. I keep saying the word two, but it's still true. There's two things that happen. One, your viewers actually get a relationship with you that's one-sided, but the viewer feels that it's really intense. It's been studied a bunch of times. It's called social surrogacy. Sometimes a lot of people had it happen during the pandemic where they didn't see real people, so they started feeling things for the people that they were watching on TV or listening to on the radio.
Yeah, the former governor of New York.
Yeah. So I mean, it's actually kind of good. It's better than not having any relationships if you're like a shut-in or things like that. But it's dangerous because what ends up happening is you get parasocial relationships where like there was this one lady, I hate the word lady. There's this one person, she's a sportscaster in the States. She was getting messages from people, fans on Messenger or whatever. She was checking a couple, but I mean, I don't know how many you get, but like generally if you have something that's on a public platform, you get a lot.
Right.
So you don't really read them all. And she missed a bunch of the giant glaring red flags. This person moved to a different city in America and stalked her at work because they thought that she would be interested, or that they were in fact already in a relationship. So with women, it's not just about whether or not you're going to wear the right thing or you're going to put off the right message. It's also there is very real danger with people stalking you, people sending messages. There was that thing on it was a commercial, I think, that was a couple of years ago. It was on Twitter. A bunch of people read off mean tweets to female sportscasters. Do you remember this? And the men that were reading it were deeply uncomfortable, but these were things that the women, if you ask them, were like, we get that all the time. No matter, they'll talk about how fat I am. They'll talk about how I'm not wearing the right clothing, how I'm pretty but should stop talking. I have no place in the locker room. I mean, that's Don Cherry said that about women sportscasters. So I think eventually towing the line gets so much, and then all of this pressure from other factors, from your boss, from fans that feel like they know you and therefore have the right to talk about you or talk to you in a way that like best friends shouldn't necessarily talk to you. They really personalize things, and eventually it's just like, fuck off, I'm not your toy. So I don't think that's necessarily a sex toy thing, although I mean it obviously plays that part as well. But I think it's also like, I'm not here for you to like dress up and spout whatever nonsense and play your make-believe and promote your ideas and take all of this abuse from coworkers, fans, whatever.
That's something that I actually really like about this song. I think that's actually my favorite part of the song, is you going through all the list of things that happen for women in certain kinds of careers. And I'm sure it's many careers in ways that I have never under experienced on my own, will never experience, and have no idea how that feels. But like, I actually like that part about this song. The explosion part against all of those negative forces that are bombarding you on any given day for no reason, from people that you don't know who they are, you will never know them, and that they are treating you like you are their personal abuse punching bag. Yeah.
And I think that's an important part. So when I know that we had talked earlier, and I don't know if you and Keith will have talked about this on the show already, but you had said that there was some like question about whether or not the song was like Puritan, like anti-sex or whatever. And I think that it's not a complaint against the band, because they are just representing one side of a discourse. And I do believe that they are approaching the subject with the intention of discourse and not debate or putting anyone down or shaming anyone. But it's easy to say, like, do you really want to be a fucking toy as a man?
Yeah.
Because if this person is real, this news anchor who said like, I'm not your fucking toy, like I'm over this, they probably got fired. So now they're economically disadvantaged. They're probably not going to get hired by anyone else in the area. Certainly not if they're like on track to do like major network kind of stuff.
And they probably have student loans for journalism school.
Yeah, which is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Interestingly, about journalism school, do you know that there's an entire section on what to wear for women when you go to journalism school?
There's an
entire section that you get to take.
Insane.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's one thing to say, you know, like stand up for yourself, assert your rights, you know, be yourself, but it's another thing to do that against an entire system of media and public persona that's telling you not to be yourself. And the risk for that is not only potentially losing your job and, you know, losing your career, having to switch. It's also potentially losing friends. It's potentially, you know, having violence done to you when people think that they have these relationships with you and then you disappoint them.
Yeah.
It's dangerous. So I don't think the band was trying to do anything negative, but I do think that the song is the story of the song is incomplete in the sense that it seems like you said, like it's this release and everything's good now, you know, but actually that person probably did really poorly.
Well, right. And then we the end of the song, it does have Chris, a man, having a learning experience, right? He says, and though I long to embrace. So here we have in this line, Chris acknowledging that he is pro-sex, that sex is good, that he likes it. But he also talks about his priorities that he's going to take into relationships: humor, opinion, a sense of compassion, creativity, and a distaste for fashion, which is a nice little rhyme on the end there. But
I love fashion.
Yeah. So it's really funny because I am just the most like, I don't know what the word is, a fashionable person. Like I just like lack it so hard in my core. So I think that line's really funny because it kind of resonates with me. But we have this person who says, okay, I'm pro-sex, but these are some other things that maybe I'm going to consider in my pantheon of interests whenever I'm pursuing a relationship. So I see it as like a 23-year-old guy having a learning experience and like rethinking the ways that he sees relationships. So in that regard, it's a really positive thing, you know?
Yeah. And I do think it is positive. I think the only criticism that I really have of the song in this kind of area is that it is only part of the conversation.
Sure.
So there, and we're going to get into this when we do part 2, but
we're almost there.
I know it's actually really important to note that so discourse and debate are two different things. Discourse is when you're having a conversation with the intention of actually learning something. So I might have an idea, I'm talking to you about it. You can completely disagree with my idea. You can think my idea is the most terrible thing that's ever come up. But if we're having discourse, then the goal is to get to a good place together. We're here for each other, to support each other, even though we're coming from different places. And I think we forget that discourse exists in modern society. I say a lot like the tertium non datur thing, like there's no middle path, right? That's another propaganda song for those who don't know, but everyone listening knows. So that is a really important thing. There is more than two paths. There's more than right and wrong. There's more than two genders. There's more than two options when it comes to combating oppressions. So we forget that all the time. And discourse is really important because as I'm saying something, you might have a whole area of knowledge that I have no access to. So one of the big things for me with feminism and anti-oppression in general is like, I think adults are lost. I think like, I'm not even talking to adults about this stuff anymore. I'm talking to kids. Kids are the ones that are actually gonna, take this and move it forward.
Yep.
Youth. So I might say that, but I'm not a teacher. You are. So maybe we're talking about this idea I have to change children, and you might have some really important thing to add to that. Right. And we can, through discourse, you disagree with something that I thought was really good, but we make the whole system better. Debate is you trying to prove I'm wrong. It's not listening to what I'm saying. There's no empathy. There's no connection. There's no compassion. It's just saying that I'm wrong. It's trying to win.
Yeah.
And so in the 90s, when this conversation was happening around like, should we be hiding our sexuality, or, limiting it to people that we're close to? Should we be blatant in our sexuality and really loud about it? That was discourse happening largely within feminist circles. And it was with the intention of finding new tools for the struggle. Deleuze, who I'm quite enamored with, he does the assemblage theory stuff, Jean Simon, he says, there's no need for fear. What is the quote? There's no need for fear or worry. There's only looking for new tools, or something like that. I'm massacring the quote. But you don't have to despair. You don't have to worry. I know, again, Chris has said on the podcast that and in the songs, there's lyrics that say, like, I'm probably never going to see a better world. There's no need for that. That's nonsense. The world is always going to be better. We're not getting into utopia. The word utopia literally means no place. It doesn't exist. What we're doing is getting better day by day. And we do that through discourse, not debate. So this song is actually a really important part of discourse. It's just, unfortunately, because it's such a tiny, short song, people don't get the whole background. So they don't see the discourse. They just see it as a final solution. And that's my only real complaint. I agree with everything that Chris says in the song. I don't know who wrote it. I didn't look. John and Chris, maybe Jord. But I think it's an important song, and I think it's a very important idea to get across, because it is about, like, whether or not women can exist freely and with open sexuality under the patriarchy without punishment or negative consequence. Yeah.
Well, I think that is a really nice place to stop on that, because I really like how you sort of ended naturally on saying, like, what you enjoy about the song, what you think the song could do a little bit better, and what you also think that the listeners could do to expand their own understanding of the song by seeking those conversations that are missing from this particular song in general. So I love that. That's our chat on Fuck Machine for sure. Do you think that we should launch into Ladies Nite in Loserville and get a slightly different perspective and story going on here?
Yes. Let's do it.
Launch into Ladies Nite in Loserville and get a slightly different perspective and story going on here?
Yes.
Okay.
Why not?
Well, I mean, this is a different one. I'm really interested to chat with you about Ladies Nite in Loserville. And this is a song. So there are many songs in the Propaganda catalog that Keith and I procrastinate intensely from talking about. This is one of them. Fuck Machine is another one of them that we procrastinate. We procrastinated Oka Everywhere. We procrastinated Dear Coach's Corner. There's Mate Ka Marisa Kun Rasi Khan. There are some that were like, we talk about it for 12 or 13 weeks before we actually record it, because we just keep kicking the can down the road. And Ladies Nite in Loserville has been this one for me that I've kicked the can down the road so many times. But before we get into the song, I'm wondering how you feel about Today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes, which could not be more different than How to Clean Everything. And I'm just curious your thoughts on it.
It's actually really funny. So every song you've asked me to do is for a record that I don't really... I mean, Let's Talk More Rock I do like that now.
That makes me really happy. Like, I love that I'm dragging you into this and you're like, oh God, this is like, oh man, this one, why can't I do a record that I like?
Yeah. So, we may have a visitor soon. I hear my dog. He's dressed as a taco.
Oh, awesome. Taco dog.
Anyway.
And he's got a mustache too. He's got a big mustache.
He does, yeah.
He's a cutie patootie.
Cut this out, but that my dog is coming.
Oh no, it's staying in.
So
dog stays in. Cutie patootie taco dog with a mustache.
Yeah. Today's Empires came out before I liked Propaganda. So it was the last record that came out before Potemkin, which is the first record that I actually loved. Like really loved though. It was a sudden and complete love affair. But Today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes, I actually hadn't heard at all before I heard Potemkin, and I went back and was hopeful of Today's Empires, and then again I didn't listen to it for years. It's actually a really good record, and I'm super excited about the remaster remix
next week.
Yes, super excited. Pre-ordered, all ready to go, taking time off work.
Sweet.
Not just for that, but like, I'm not gonna lie, I'm taking time off work. So my problem with that record is may be fixed in its entirety with the remaster. I know Chris had said in a couple of interviews that he wasn't sure if it was worth doing, like if people would want that. And I'm like, maybe not for every other record, although it would be interesting to hear like how to clean everything with like better vocals and I don't know, that would be interesting. I don't know if I'd buy it, but it'd be interesting. But Today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes came out at a time when music was heavy music, at least there was this big push for everything to be like really loud and intense. And so when they were mixing and mastering, things got compressed and sounds got all muddy, and I just can't with that. It's weird because I like hardcore punk, so I love that like distorted, messy sound, but I actually can't listen to hardcore without having seen it live first. So awesome. I have this thing where I'll listen to it live and hear it in person with like ideally a good sound person or a decent sound person, and then I can carry over the love to the recordings. But I find most recordings have the same problem where they're just too loud. People don't really know how to keep the difference in sound quality. So I see music a little bit and I find it muddy. That's the best way I can really describe the record. It's just the tones are weird. The voices, like the vocals, sink into the background. Not Todd so much, but Chris's sink into the background a bit more than I would like. And I don't like the guitar tone. It feels compressed. I don't know if it's actually compressed, but it feels that way. So I've always lamented Today's Empires because I really wanted to love it. There's so many good songs in there, and I love the lyrics to Purina. Love. But I can't listen to music that has like just it bothers my ears. I've had a lot of, this is personal. Y'all need to know what my 8 concussions. And I have some like inner ear problems. So sometimes music literally like bothers my ear in a way that I can't get into it. But I could never get into it until I listened to it for Ladies Nite in Loserville, and I listened to it for like a week, and now I'm like, give me that remix so that I can actually hear it the way hopefully it was intended to be heard.
I think the band is so excited about it. Like I feel so good about it because like I think that even if like, so I'm not a very experienced audio person. Like I love music and obviously I listen to tons of music all the time, but like the way that music lands on me, it doesn't like, I've never really had those kinds of problems with Today's Empires, but the fact that the band themselves are so happy with the new product makes me know that I will like that one more because they feel happy with it. And if they're happy with their work, I am just inherently going to like it more. Does that make sense? So I'm kind of like, I don't really know if I'm sure I'll notice some differences, but I don't have like a fine-tuned like studio engineer or very, very professional musician approach to listening to music. So like, as long as they're happy, that's something that just will make me happy and will enjoy the new version. Cause I know that some people out there are like, I'm going to listen to the original one cause that's the way it came out. But like, I just am so excited for the new one.
I remember being a pretentious punk. That's fine.
There you go. There you go.
No, I agree. I think that the fact that the band is into what they've done and we're so disappointed with the first one, which I wasn't aware of until recently, but I think it'll be good. I can't notice always, right? People remaster and remix. I can't notice the difference between songs. I'm not like a big audio, audiophile either. I've done a little bit of mixing and stuff, but it's just it's a feeling. It's not even like I couldn't tell you what the levels were, or like even if it is compression that's bothering me. It's just something.
I love it. Okay, so let's get into the song Ladies Nite in Loserville. I watched a video of Propaganda performing this song live in 2003 in Chicago, and it's one of the only live performances that I could find online, and the sound quality is fabulous. It's like a straight off the mixing board at the Congress Theater in Chicago. It sounds great. And at the beginning of the song, Chris says, pro-feminism, pro-sex, and then they launch into the song. So it's a far more pro-sexuality song, in my view, that actually feels like empowerment of like a badass pro-sex woman who seems to embrace her own power and who feels powerful in her social interactions to say certain things. And it seems like a big shift between the tone of the tune on How to Clean Everything and you're refusing to be a man on Let's Talk More Rock. And then this song in 5 years later in 2001 on Today's Empires. And I'm wondering if you can just generally comment on like the shift in feminist movements between these three records. Why would they write such a different song is what I want to know about the context that this was created in.
It's the same song. I know it's not, but again, like I said in the last episode, it was discourse. It was conversations that were going back and forth. It was never like, this is what feminism is, although people from the outside have often reduced a very large body of work to like whatever is popular. You know, it's the greasy wheel. Nope, squeaky wheel gets the grease. Yeah. So the stuff that was really, really loud and really disseminated in the media is what got heard. But it is the same conversation. The conversation was what is in the interest of encouraging women's freedom and gender freedom now as we move, into a new era where we're actually including things beyond the binary. How do we best encourage and support liberation for all genders? And so the conversation was repression, hiding your sexuality, maintaining safety at the cost of maybe being loud with your sexuality, or saying, fuck the patriarchy, this is who I am. And, if you push past my boundaries, there will be consequences. That discourse in the kind of 80s, early 90s, kind of solidified. Refusing to be a Man, the book by Stoltenberg, was written because they were talking directly about how it's not just about what women do to be safe or to be free. It's also about what men have to do. So I am going to refuse to be the man who abuses people. I'm going to refuse to be the man who is, causing harm. I'm going to refuse to be the man who's causing harm to myself. Like, can't be my own person because I'm trying to live up to these ridiculous ideals. So that was part of the discourse, and that came forward. And then patriarchy, because like I said in the last episode, patriarchy adapts, and it's not just patriarchy, it's all oppressions. Our systems are built on oppression, all of them. Every system that we use, our financial system, our social systems. I work for a not-for-profit that's been around for like 100 years, and we've always been pro-people, pro-helping people, but we've also always had systems of oppression built in. So patriarchy has found a way, looking at this like, should we be repressed or should we be sexually free, to win no matter what. So women who decide to be sexually active, sexually loud, are, used in the media to sell whatever is being sold. They're, used to get people's attention. They're used to make money, and they're made fun of and put down for doing those things. And people who are, repressed, Larry Flint and his, I used to love Playboy. I did, I'm not gonna lie. I had a Playboy bunny party once in Toronto, because fuck patriarchy, I will do what I want to do. And I didn't realize at the time the harm that I might have been doing at the same time. So basically this conversation of repression versus sexuality comes forward. And now there's a bunch of dudes in this conversation for Ladies Nite in Loserville. There's a bunch of dudes who are probably having a conversation. I've lived through this so many times. A bunch of dudes talking about what's best for women. And the woman is just sitting there in the background saying, I'm just going to keep drinking because it's more productive than actually engaging with these people. I spent a lot of time in my 20s in particular in political circles, in activist and anarchist circles, and there was a lot of people who were just there to get laid. Not a lie. Saying the right things, acting woke, although that wasn't the term at the time, so that they could seem sympathetic and vulnerable and interesting. And that's the impression I get from these guys. They're just having the conversation to seem, to get the right optics, right? To fit in to whatever kind of social circle they've determined that they want to be part of. Yeah, so it's the same conversation, but now the patriarchy has used women's freedom of sexuality. They've used women's repression, and they've used those things to punish them or to continue to exercise power over them. I'm pretty sure I had another quote for that. I don't know.
Could you see the newscaster from the Fuck Machine song as being the same character in this song? Could you see those being the same people?
No, maybe. Honestly, I'm not very hopeful when it comes to the things that the patriarchy does to people. I think most of us have these giant social systems thrust upon us. People make culture, culture makes people. A lot of them we don't even see it happening. It's very taken for granted and assumed. And I think that the type of thing that happened to that anchor, it's possible that person would have come back and said, like, fuck you, I'm here, and I'm bitter in a bar. It's a nice movie.
Five drinks
movie
in.
story. But I think what would have actually happened to that person, like I said in the previous episode, is that they would have lost their career. They would have learned the consequences of standing up for themselves in a system, and they would have stopped doing that. That's my experience with what most people will have happen. I can't imagine that the person in this song is much older than 25, and if that person is older than 25, then I can't imagine that they're younger than 55.
I was thinking that the person in the Ladies Nite in Loserville, this woman, I picture her as being 40 to 45, like post divorce with a husband who was possibly emotionally withholding in every way and just like emotionally absent and punishing. And then when she would call him out on it, he would make her feel badly about herself until she eventually snapped and just is like, I'm out of here. Like, this marriage is not a partnership. I'm gone. And then, has some kind of renaissance while single. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, it could be, that's what I'm saying. It could be someone 55 or older who's like, I no longer give any fucks.
Yeah.
When I actually listened to this, again, I'm old, so I don't know. Do you ever see Good Will Hunting?
Oh yeah. Serious? Of course.
And there's that scene where Matt Damon is like listening to the pretentious douchebags in the bar in Boston, and they're kind of saying all the right things to try and get the girl and trying to come off as being very smart, and then he talks to her and gets her number, and he says, how do you like them apples, or whatever. I get that scene in my head, because that's what it is. It's the guys who've taken kind of politics out of being something that's actually for the benefit of everyone. It's no longer a discourse. It's a debate where you've got to prove that other dudes are wrong so you can get laid. And I've been in this space where these people, intentionally or not, that's what they're doing. They're just, it's not about actually working together for a common solution. It's about accumulating power.
Mm-hmm.
It's problematic.
Let's talk about these lyrics, because this is a wild tune. I have read critiques of this song as well, where people say this is the most cringy Propagandhi song, which I was really kind of shocked by. But I don't know. So like, I'm curious about your thoughts on some of these words. So we have these opening lines: drains her fifth, which I take to mean her fifth drink of the evening.
Yeah. It could it could be a fifth of whiskey, though.
It could be. So we're either super smashed on a fifth of whiskey, or it's the fifth drink. So we're just at the precipice of being drunk. And spits out a Greek translation. She slurs, how much more bullshit you got left, because you've been feeding me this crap about free speech and thought police, like I'm supposed to sit and swoon. So when I see this line, the visual that I get is, that meme of the woman in the bar with the guy who's wasted yelling in her ear, and her face is like this. Like, because this guy like is in a bar and it's like attached himself to her, and he's just yelling things in her ear, thinking that he's impressing her while he's like doing his thing, trying to be like, hey, I like you, but he's essentially just yelling drunken insanity into her words. And so that's like the I'm supposed to sit and swoon part. And I'm just curious on your thoughts on like what pops into your mind in these opening lines.
I've literally had, and I don't want to make fun of the Trotskyists, but it's a lot of Trotskyists. I've literally had them come up and like start spouting off a bunch of nonsense and trying to impress me with their knowledge of, history and politics and economics. And I'm just like, dude, I know this.
This is literal. This is a literal line to you. This is a literal experience.
It has literally happened to me, and it has happened to women around me. And I'm like, this isn't going to work. Like, I don't know what you're trying to do, but also, and this was, again, I was at this point where I was like hyper, I don't know, like I don't like to say it like it's in the past or it's like a particular time, but like I was like, fuck the patriarchy, my sexuality is my sexuality, and like, if you want to fuck and that is all you want, then you need to say that. And I might say no, but like, don't waste either of our time pretending that I'm stupid, or that you're stupid, or that you're some sort of knight in shining armor. Just fucking say what you want.
Can I comment on that?
Accept the consequences. Yes.
Because like, that is a thing where men have this inability to come across as being good. Do you know what I mean? We're like obsessed with other people thinking that that's a good guy. So in order to say like, I just want to have sex, that makes us seem, in our minds, insensitive, which we cannot allow to happen. So then what we do is we do this big old song and dance about appearing sensitive and getting sex in that manner. And then what happens is, after it's over, then men become emotionally withdrawn and like punishingly absent mentally and emotionally. So they come at it from such an inauthentic manner, and then they wind up hurting the person far more than if they have just said, let's just have sex tonight and like, let's just enjoy it. So that's a really interesting dynamic that you just kind of laid out there.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, the refusing to be a man episode, and we were talking about like how feminism is for everybody and the patriarchy hurts everybody. It's a perfect example, because the reason that you can't say, I just want to have sex, I am a human being who is like actually programmed to some degree to want physical connection, whether it's sexual or whatever. We want intimacy, but we can't say that we want intimacy because social norms have constructed and conditioned us to believe that there's some sort of like process that has to happen. Particularly like the nonsense around like getting married, or I mean, if you want to get married, but I just mean like the idea that sex is somehow attached to these processes is just ridiculous. Or that like sex is limited to people who are like 16 or what, like we spend so much time trying to stop teenagers from having sex, or like not thinking about older people who still engage in sexual activity, because we have these ideas about it. But the reality is that like patriarchy forces conditions where men believe that their best chance of getting laid or having sex or having any intimacy, because frankly, that's part of the patriarchy as well, is that men can't ask for non-sexual intimacy. That's got its own issues attached to it. But, if you can't say that you just want it, so then you cope in the way that you need to cope, and you go through the process that you've been conditioned to go through. And then you disappear, or you're not interested in relationship, but you can't say that. So it's like the ghosting or the like, all of that. And on the other hand, women are also conditioned to not admit that they want to have sex, which is just, again, it's like ridiculous. We also aren't taught about like masturbation or self-stimulation or anything, which is another whole fucking shit show, because a lot of people would probably avoid a lot of really shitty relationships if they just learned how to masturbate. Yeah. That said, women are shamed for being sexual. They're shamed for showing an interest in sex. Women were literally, and in many countries around the world still are, told that they're not allowed to have sex outside of marriage. They're not allowed, like they're literally not allowed to show sexual attraction, that, they are to do their duty to their husband, irrelevant of whether or not they're actually interested in doing it at this particular time or ever with that person. So women don't know how to be honest and forthright either. And obviously not all men, not all women. People can yell at me if they want.
Of course.
But it's both sides. The patriarchy tells men that they can't ask, and it tells women that they can't say that they're even interested outside of some sort of bullshit, constructed relationship. And again, relationships are great. They're good. But not when the only reason you're getting into a relationship is because you have sexual impulses.
Yeah. Well, and that's a reason why this song blew my mind so much in 2001, is because like, it's about a person. So it's character created by a male songwriter. Okay, so we have men writing this song, so it's a character that is created, but this is like a really authentic portrait of a person, a presentation of a person. I know that it's a nameless woman, and I know, oh, it's a puppy, and I know that it's like a, you know, a nameless character, but it's a really, really different thing that I had ever been exposed to in songwriting ever.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's made up. I mean, it might be. Again, I did think about like asking and just like putting it out there, like, hey dudes, is this
Do you
a
know
real
this
person?
person?
Yeah, because I know a couple of women who would fit this bill from Winnipeg at the
Yeah,
time.
I know a couple as well who are
Yeah,
friends of mine, and I'm like, you are such an impressively honest person, and you really inspire me with your honesty. Like, it's so
yeah.
refreshing when you meet people that you know that they are 100% telling you the truth every time their mouth opens. And I'm like, wow, this is incredible.
Yeah, I find it really frustrating when people don't, which is like all the time. But and I overshare all the time, not from my perspective oversharing, but like socially, I do. If I know things, I can't not say them. So, you know, if it's an abortion debate that I hear or like some sort of prudery, I'm like, I had an abortion. I don't give a fuck. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
I obviously do give a fuck. It was a very serious time and I made the good decision, but like, I'll happily tell you.
You
You
don't
want to
talk,
know?
you don't hide
You
it.
want to
Yeah.
know? You want to know about my fucking menstrual cycle? Sure. Sex? I'll talk about it. You want to talk like anything? There is no my childhood trauma. Happy to do that because our problems start and end where we cannot ask for intimacy and we cannot be vulnerable. And so we construct all of these bullshit systems and give away all of our power to hide the fact that we want intimacy. And that it's just fucking stupid. I mean, I say it that way, and that's terrible. People and trauma is complicated. It's not that you're stupid if you're feeling traumatized, but it's if you actually step back and look at all of the things we put in place to put between ourselves and the things or the people that we care about, it's absurdism.
Wow. This is hard stuff to talk about. Like, and so many relationships die because people are unwilling to say these things that you and I are saying over the internet. Like, we've hung out a couple of times.
It's a lot harder when you know people, though. It's a lot harder to say it to a person you know, to be fair.
Totally. But like, this is how marriages end. You know what I mean? Like,
I've
the
been
inability the inability to say these kinds of things to your life partner that you have chosen to be with. This is where things break down and fall apart. So that's why this is so fascinating to me. We've got these next lines. 3 more rounds, subject changes. She lays it down. Fuck Larry Flint, campaign to silence women who stand up and fight back. Like, do you have any thoughts on the whole like inclusion of Larry Flint and his like you know,
really...
he's the needle dick later on in the song about the First Amendment and the selective use of the First Amendment, blah blah blah. So I'm curious on your thoughts of the inclusion of Larry Flint within this song.
So going back to what we talked about before around like the repression, victim feminism, this idea that like these women who had worked to have sexual freedom and to be promiscuous if that was their choice, to have control of their own reproductive rights, were followed by reactionary, I don't mean reactionary in a bad way, I just mean like in reaction to that, there was these women who did come off as repressed. And the media likes to support current systems of power, even when they're left leaning or progressive. They tend to support the systems that keep them in place. So the stories of feminism that were being talked about post, at this time in the early 2000s, the ones that were being reported on were the repressed feminists. They were the feminists. They weren't the women who were like in the 70s. They were put to with the hippies. The 70s free love, that wasn't feminism. That was the hippies. So feminists were constructed for the mainstream as being repressed, as being man-hating, as being only lesbians, burning their bras, like that type of myth that persists today.
Right.
So Larry Flint.
I love how you said his name and just burst into laughter.
For those who don't know, the publisher of Hustler, and for those who don't know, another version of Playboy, kind of very similar. He and I mean Hugh Hefner did too, and a lot of other people. They argued that they were actually promoting feminism and women's empowerment by allowing them to be sexually free by posting pictures of them naked. Because I mean, like, if you go back to Regency era, Victorian era, like an ankle was considered like super risque. You couldn't let a man touch your hands without gloves on, because apparently flames of sexuality would just burst out and the whole society would fall apart. So Larry Flynt is mentioned in this song, but really there was a lot of media involved folks, magazines, television shows, whatever, that were pushing this idea that like sexuality was something that was promoting women's rights. But again, it's the choice that's a woman's right. It's not the kind of gluttony of over-sexualized, overstimulated kind of situation. So Larry Flynt tried to argue, and did so successfully, created an entire movement and a whole group of people that argued that, and I was one of them, I'm not going to lie. I mean, I didn't buy into Larry Flynt per se, but I did very much was like, fuck you, sexuality is fun and I'm going to do this. And I like Playboy, and I don't see why women shouldn't be naked. And if some dude is interested in that and gets sexually stimulated, that's not on me. They're going to do that whether I walk down the street, you know, or I can't control how other people react. But of course, the other side of that is like, yeah, you can. You cannot take part in a culture that, you know, a lot of the women that are involved in Playboy are the same women who are involved in strip clubs, and the same women that are involved in pornography, who are there. Some are there, I'm sure, because they actually enjoy that work. But a lot of them are traumatized. A lot of them are coming from places of, you know, they need the money, they need the recognition, like mental health issues of needing that, like the only thing that they believe is good about themselves is their looks. And so they pursue careers and lifestyles that do that. But I mean, like, that is their choice, but it's also patriarchal pressure that's leading them to that. Like, they should have more choices. They should believe that you know, they have more worth than what they look like in the centerfold. So Larry Flynt is an interesting character, but that's what happens. Feminism has discourse. The mainstream patriarchy says, cool, let's use that. So they used women's desire to have their freedom of sexuality to sell patriarchal products and to reinforce ideas of women as existing for the objectification and for the pleasure of men. I read this cool thing the other day. It was a meme, so it's not like I'm not telling you anything academic here, but it talked about how for men, sex is all about taking, and for women, it's all about giving. So you save your virginity, you give yourself to your husband. You know, it's the way the language is constructed. It's all about women giving something over, and men, it's all about, you know, taking pleasure, you know, taking someone's virginity. So we have this idea, this overarching social idea that sex is about a power dynamic, and it doesn't have to be. It can just actually be about intimacy, but we don't know how to do that. So we can misconstrue sexual impulses as the desire to be dominated. And actually Paglia, she said that too. She said that every woman she might pretend she wants to be frigid and cold, and this isn't a direct quote, but every woman harbors a secret fantasy of being dominated by a man, is the not stated end of that sentence.
How do you feel about the very, very pro-orgasm lines in the song where a woman is essentially standing in a bar telling people, like, this is what I want? Like, how do you feel about those?
Orgasms are good. There's no, I mean, like, I think, again, I'm not propagandy. I don't know what they were thinking when they wrote this, but and you did earlier mention the fact that, like, some people found this really cringy, and I think part of why they find it cringy is because there's a little bit of repression in there. And repression's not bad. Repression is a choice, although we do use the word in a way that implies something's being held down or restricted. But And that's where the word comes from, I guess. But the idea, I fuck to come. Like, if you tell me, if you're a person who says that you fuck for any other reason, then you've either never actually orgasmed, or sex has been something that you do solely for procreation, right? So there's lots of people who go through fertility treatments, and it's just like, we aren't here anymore for that. We're here to to try and make this baby,
Yeah.
So I guess there are a few instances where it's not true, but like, everyone fucks to come. The thing is, women were not constructed as actually having any desire to do that. And what's fucked? So there's a book called The Height Report. It was like a report that was done on women's health. And it was kind of just a whole bunch of stuff about women's health that was published. I can't remember when, 60s-ish, maybe. So this may be something that everyone knows. I don't know. Maybe this is common knowledge, but the word hysteria, which is my favorite Muse song, but the word hysteria actually comes from the same root word as hysterectomy. So it relates to the uterus. And hysteria was actually diagnosed by doctors through the 50s and 60s, and possibly earlier, I don't know, but women were hysterical if they complained, if they were feminists, if they complained that they felt restricted in their life, if they complained that they could no longer take their husband's, domineering, if they complained that they wanted to like get out of the house and get away from children. A lot of times the doctor would literally, the medical establishment would diagnose them as having hysteria, which was a generalized disorder, not being willing to put up with your life. And the treatment for hysteria was manual stimulation of the clitoris. So the doctor would literally masturbate to the woman. I know. Yeah. So it's like, you're not getting enough sex. But they couldn't say to the woman, like, what you actually want is intimacy and sex, because women weren't constructed as being in control of their own sexuality. They weren't the subject of their sex lives. They were the object of someone else's sex lives. So instead, doctors would literally get women off, like in doctors' offices and stirrups.
Mind blowing. Well, and there's another book too that is insane. There's holy crap. There's another book that I read in the last couple of years called Becoming Clitorate, which is a sex research book about the orgasm gap between men and women, and about it. Like, a lot of the book is around how men see sex as being one thing, which is like what
penetration?
Penetration. Yeah. Penis, vagina, penetration. And it's like this very, very limiting factor where it's extremely penis centric. And what that means is that there is this realm of sexuality that works for so many women out there that is different than just penetration. So what you wind up happening is the man is essentially, it's a totally selfish act, and it's not attending to what the woman actually finds as quote unquote the main event, which is how the book refers to it. So for men, the main event is extremely clear, and for women, the main event is totally different. But what happens is you have these married couples where the main event is never communicated between each other, and the man never really seeks the answer to their own partner's dissatisfaction, because their main event is completely fulfilled 100% of the time. And
I might argue with that, but sure.
There you go.
They might think it's fulfilled. They don't actually know what they're talking about. If you're relying on penetration, then you're losing, even as a man, you're losing more than half of the options of pleasure that exist. And
for sure,
like, there's no question. Especially if you are the only one penetrating as a man. This is not a podcast about sex, but
this is a song about sex, though.
It is, and I'm happy to talk about sex, but I could
New
go
rabbit
off
hole.
into directions. Yeah, it's a rabbit hole, and we'll retract. If people are interested in those things, I can certainly direct you to resources for healthy sexual participation and whatnot. But the thing is, that is also about shame and patriarchy. That's the same thing, because I know as the woman in a heterosexual relationship, and several heterosexual relationships over the course of my like 41 years. A lot of men just want to do it right. Like, it's not actually selfish. They just want to be good lovers. And so they don't know how to do that because conversations aren't happening about it, because pornography and the media really are just telling you that penetration is, as you say, the main event. You can't ask your mother. Every conversation I've ever had, and I had a couple, and my mother wouldn't have sex conversations with me, so she had other people have them for her. It's so funny. If you ever met my mom, like, I'm here talking about sex and my mom is like super repressed, and that's fine. She's also wonderful. We're very different.
It's very funny. It's very adorable.
Yeah, but the thing is, most people's sex conversations in modern times, and by modern times, let's say since the Second World War, I don't know, are about how to not get people pregnant, or since the 80s about how to avoid AIDS and STIs.
Yeah.
But it's not actually about sex. It's about like the negative consequences, or the perceived
horrible
consequences of sex, right? So we pathologize sex. We make it this scary thing. We have all of these movies. Like, I love movies. I love pop culture when it comes to like, I don't know, just like stuff that's just ridiculous that I know isn't going to happen, right? Like all the 80s, like 16 Candles movies and stuff. I look at them and I know that they're, sexist and probably racist and Western centric and whatever, but like there's a nostalgia there for me. But all of those things teach us that sex is just about a man chasing a woman, the woman playing hard to get just long enough to pretend that she's not sexual and doesn't have any sort of interest, and has to be like convinced of the worthiness or whatever, I don't know, of this particular man. And then it's about the kiss and the assumption of penetration.
Yeah.
So we literally don't teach kids, and we don't want to talk to kids about sex, because God forbid you should admit that, like, how much I don't mind talking about stuff, but like my family may have issues with me talking about them. But like, how many children, for those of you who have children, male children in particular, like, was it when they were 16 that they first had an erect penis? Because I doubt that.
Right.
Right. Like, I there's a problem if your child hasn't, noticed their own genitalia by the time they're like 3.
Right.
But we like to pretend that like children don't think of sex, and then all of a sudden, boom, you're 15, 16, and it's like, oh God, don't get pregnant, don't get an STI, don't do that, abstinence rings.
Yeah.
So how are you supposed to learn about masturbation or about all of the various ways that bodies actually work themselves or together? How are you supposed to learn about what you like and what you don't like if nobody actually tells you, and by the time you're actually having sex, you're terrified to actually admit that you have no idea?
Yeah, absolutely. That is the trend that happens. That's the cycle that we all fall into. And I think that a lot of people will resonate with that, of like, by the time you're doing it, you have no idea what you're doing. You have no experience talking about it because it's been pathologized so much, as you mentioned. And then all of a sudden you are just flying blind almost into this situation where you know that you don't want to get a sexually transmitted disease. Like, that's really all you know about it. And it's a terrifying thing.
It's terrifying. And for men, I assume, I don't know, you're a dude. It's even worse because you can't admit you're a virgin. For women, you're supposed to pretend you're a virgin for the rest of your life. But for men, you can't admit that you're a virgin. So everything is like, nah, I know what I'm doing. This is fine.
Right.
You know, like, you can ask your friends or talk about, like the same way you would if you were, for the first time, like, getting pimples, or the first time you ever like shave your beard or something. It's not like you're like, oh, I did this, like I cut myself, and first time. It's like, dear fucking God, don't let anyone know that, like, I literally am flying by the seat of my non-pants.
Yeah. And it's a scary experience growing up like that. And you can't also talk about masturbation with men, because then you get shamed in middle school, being like, you're the guy that did that. You know what I mean? Like, so
or all the fucking terrible stories, like the hairy hand stuff that they tell you, like you're gonna like, No.
Yeah, it's insane. Like I just had like these like horrible memories of things that happened in middle school and the conversations that happened in middle school, and that's really where all the bad stuff really starts happening. It's I'm just like getting like
Yeah, it's
cringy
cringy. And I
just
think that's
thinking
why the
about it.
song is cringy. I think that's why people think this song is cringy. And if folks are listening and that's not why they find it cringy, and please Atlaxis me. I want to know why you find it cringy, but I do think that's what it is. I think they carry in, we all do it. We carry in our kind of other thoughts, other feelings, things that we're not even conscious that we're feeling at the time. And it is cringy to think about like that first time you had sex, or the first like 1,000 times or whatever, until you fucking figure it out. And it's even worse if you never figure it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
that's why I started reading those books. Like, you know, I was older than 35 and I started reading these books and being like, wow, I learned so much by actually just being brave and being curious and wanting to know more about these topics that I feel like I'm completely stunted in. Like, it's all about being open and curious and being interested in learning more about these things that we've been scared to learn about our entire lives, that have been pathologized and mythologized in our minds, and just being open to those, to new information, being like older, like, and being like, well, I still have a lot to learn, and doing it is really empowering, especially for me, especially, you know.
I got really lucky because I have an uncle who's he's only 10 years older than me. He's 50. And he's queer. So I was introduced to queer communities really young, like in the early 90s. I was hanging out in queer communities as a kid. And as I got older, I was comfortable in those communities. So when I moved to Toronto, I found those communities. And there was a lot of conversations that were really openly had about how one has sex in ways that are not solely penetration oriented. And I found my way to various like if you go to the right sex shops. So I'm not talking about the ones that necessarily sell like latex and dominance, although no issues with S&M. I'm talking about, in if you're in Halifax or Ottawa, Venus Envy is a spot that you can go to where they just know everything. It's like, I don't know if they train their people or if they hire people that already know, but they sell a lot of gear, but they also are very pro-sex, sex positive, very open to discussing like how to use things, how the body works. There's workshops. Find places like that, and I was lucky enough to find those really early, and so now I'm like 20 years later, who wants to talk about sex? Yeah.
Do you like this song, Ladies Nite in Loserville?
Yeah. Except for the like dissonance. I don't like the sound. I don't like the I feel like it sounds like somebody's like, when you have a really obnoxious neighbor who's playing like music on the other side of the wall, and you're just like, you actually would like the music if it just wasn't like that kind of hazy through the wall, kind of too much drum and bass.
Sure.
Yeah?
That makes a lot of sense, actually.
Yeah, that's how I feel about today's empires. I feel like it just it's like it's listening through water. There's some sort of barrier where nothing's coming through really clear, and I need it to be clearer. So I do like the song, and I'm looking forward to the remix where hopefully it's clearer.
So Mary, I have a theory here. For the 3 episodes that you're on, Refusing to Be a Man, Fuck Machine, Ladies Night in Loserville, I see these as a trilogy exploring Chris's exposure to various kinds of feminism throughout his life, and it's a topic that he continues to revisit. And he does it on Tartuffe in Victory Lap as well. So it's a topic that continues to come up, and I'm wondering if you see these sort of as like a trilogy storyline for the episodes that you've appeared on.
I don't know if I'd say it's a storyline, just because I don't, like we said, we don't really know who these people are.
Sure.
And they could just be examples or whatever. So I don't know if I agree with that, but it's definitely a narrative. And it's definitely a narrative that speaks to what the band was experiencing, what they were listening to, what they were interested in terms of feminism. Like I said, the first one, so not the first episode I was on, but in chronological order, Fuck Machine is really about that internal discourse in feminism that was happening about whether women's liberation is best served by repression or open sexuality. And I think that song kind of comes down a little hard on the shaming women who are repressed, not realizing that like sometimes, a lot of times, repression is required for safety or for economic stability or whatever. And in an ideal world, we'd say fuck the economics and fuck capitalism and go off and do our own thing. But like we all know that that's not actually how the world works, because there's individual choices that lead to freedom, but there's also structural pushback. So that's the first song. The second song would be Refusing to be a Man. And that's recognizing, I think, and it's important because I complained about Fuck Machine. I said, it's only part of the conversation. And I think Refusing to be a Man is another part of the conversation, which is it's not just about what women do. It's not just about, whether women make a choice to be sexual or quote unquote repressed. Of course, repression could mean that you're just saving it for the bedroom and you're not putting it out there into the whole world. And there's all kinds of stuff around that, around religion and social expectations and whatnot. But Refusing to be a Man is saying, like, I get it. It's not actually just what you do and whether or not you put it out there. It's also about how I respond to it and what I do and what I put out there. So, the idea that you recognize that you're conditioned to be attracted to a certain thing. Like I said, paintings had very round bodies, thick thighs, women, like the Venus de Milo or whatever that one is literally like this woman who's probably like in today's terms, like bigger than, what would be considered acceptable by standards of beauty, which is a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
Marilyn Monroe was bigger. She was considered a sex symbol and was bigger. Twiggy in the 60s was tiny. So what is considered attractive for women has changed, and what has been attractive for men over time has changed. So it's an important part of the conversation. Interesting side note also, high heels were originally worn by men, not women, because rich aristocrats thought that it would give wearing high heels, which was something the cavalry, the military, horse riding military wore, would give them some sort of like vigor. So they started wearing them, and then women started wearing them to keep up with the men in terms of height and fashion. And then once women started wearing them, the men were like, no, that's too feminine. Also, the color blue up until the early 1900s was only for young unmarried women. And the color pink was, because it is the color of genitalia, it was for men to show their aggressive dominance. So the things we find attractive and okay in terms of gender change drastically over time. And they are socially constructed. Obviously, hormones still matter and our biology matters, but we're constructed. And Refusing to be a Man recognizes that. And I think that's an important part of the conversation. And then for Ladies Nite and Loserville, you and I were talking outside of this. And I was reading your kind of plan for what we were going to do today. And you, Greg likes plans, guys.
I plan like crazy.
Yeah, and it's important. It's better than I don't plan. I just randomly ramble. But you were saying, like, I don't know if maybe you want to talk about it, but like your feelings on the I fuck to come section.
Oh man, those lines blew me away. Like, yeah, like I was like 17 when I heard this, right? And so it's hard for me to talk about like how important this particular lyric was for me, but it really does. It showed me like I was kind of referring to earlier about the penis centricity of male sexuality and how we are so inwardly concerned with our own orgasm in a lot of ways that it leads a lot of, people's sexual experiences. It leads to just lots and lots of disappointment and so much limitation that like is imposed upon us, and we don't really know how to break out of that. So whenever I see this person, this woman who, because I'd never really heard these lines from like a female, right? I've never heard like these words from like a female point of view before about owning their sexuality, unapologetically and being like, the purpose of my sexuality is to orgasm, is like this experience of pleasure that I have within this human body in this very limited time that I'm on this earth. I would like for this to be good for me. And so it was really jarring for me. And I've thought about it endlessly since this record came out 20 years ago. But it was very inspiring because it made me want to be a good partner, be a good sexual partner who actually cared about the other person and not just being like inwardly concerned about, my own sexual experience or things like that. Because I think that what that does is whenever a guy is focusing on their inward stress and anxiety will build, and that will make them a very, very selfish and detached lover because they're concerned so much about their own importance that it doesn't concern the other person as much. And then it just becomes almost like a solo experience in a lot of ways. So that's something that I think about a lot when this song comes about. And I'm still processing how I feel about this, which is the reason why I procrastinated this song for the last year and a half, because this is something that I'm very much processing in real time right now.
Yeah. And I love that that's your perspective on it, because I don't believe that there's a natural difference between men and women when it comes to sex drive or when it comes to, interest in intimacy. Obviously, there's differences between people, period. And there's, generally categories of gender, there's going to be differences between them. But I do think that because of the way we're conditioned, women see things very differently than men versus trans people or whatnot. And when I read this line, this is the line that actually put all three of these songs together for me. So I was going to talk about it earlier, but I figured toward here would be better. So the first song is about repression versus sexuality. It's about, what we're doing as women in reaction to patriarchy and how we're claiming our own space. The second song is about how men need to take some responsibility for their part, not only their part in patriarchy, but their part in reproducing their own oppression, as do women, no question, which I think the first song is about women talking about how do we take responsibility for our own oppression? Like, how do we make things better? We can't just be victims. It can't be victim feminism. It has to be, we have power and we have to use it and prove that we have it and take what we need as power. I think this song is actually a woman saying, listening to a bunch of men and a la Larry Flint saying that, like, women who don't like Playboy, women who don't, do the free love thing, those people are repressed. And they're the feminazis who ruin feminism by bringing their prudish, anti-femininity, bra-burning lesbianism to the party. They hate men. And they're feminazis, right? Comparing us to like the Holocaust, which makes, that it's the greater internet fuckwad theory. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but every argument on the internet ends with somebody saying Hitler. I think that's what it is, or I could be wrong. The fuckwad theory might just be that everyone on the internet thinks that they have a voice and uses it. Anyway, so this woman is looking at these people having this discussion about like what's best for women, and I assume that they're talking about how repressed feminists are, because that's when she turns around and says, don't lay this feminazi bullshit on me, right? Just because I believe that I have the right to cover my body. This conversation happens a lot with Islamophobia, whether or not women are repressed because they're covering their hair or wearing burqas or whatever. And we can have that discussion, but really it's their choice. And that's the point of feminism. It's their choice. I will help them if they actually need help, but I can't determine for them that they need help. Likewise, if you are wearing, covering your body and wearing like stockings and still, in the middle of summer, fully covered, or aren't comfortable talking about sex or whatever, that's not repression. That's your that's your choice. That's who you are. And while it could come off as repression, it might be the result of repression. It's still you. You got to do what makes you comfortable. So that my reading of this song is actually that this woman is listening to these men talking about how like Playboy is awesome and it allows women to, or not Playboy, Hustler. Sorry, Larry. Playboy and Hustler are awesome, and they free women, and women should go out and do these things to prove that they are no longer repressed and under the thumb of men, and that they can even control men. That conversation happened. Women can control men with their sexuality. So there's no such thing as patriarchy, because men are tied to their penises and dragged around by their sexuality, apparently. So when it says I fuck to come, I don't think that's actually generalized. I think what they're saying here is, don't tell me I'm repressed. Just because I don't want to fuck you doesn't actually mean that I'm repressed. Just because I don't flaunt my sexuality, just because I don't allow my sexuality to be objectified or commercialized, just because I want what's best for all women, even if those women come off as repressed to you, doesn't mean that when it comes right down to it, I fuck to come. I'm not having sex to please any particular person other than myself. And I think that's an important part of the song, because they're literally comparing, feminazis. You don't want to have sex with me, it's because you're a feminazi. You don't want to, come to this concert wearing the tiniest skirt ever and high heels and like fashion, feminazi. That kind of thing, right? So I think that this song actually completes the propaganda commentary on second, early third wave feminism, saying like, just because you read me a certain way doesn't mean that I'm not still all about women's liberation, and I'm not still all about, the liberation of all people, to have the right to do what they need to do, right? Don't judge the book by its cover.
Amazing. Well, Mary, what an amazing conversation. I'm going to learn a lot whenever I re-listen to this interview. I'm just so pumped that you're my friend, and that you want to hang out with us and talk about these very challenging ideas. Like I'm learning so much, and I'm going to be 38 in a couple of weeks. So like I am looking at like the second half of my life, so to speak. And I feel like I am still learning so much about these topics, and talking about it, especially publicly on a podcast where people will actually listen to it, it's hard. It's a little stressful. But you've just made this so enjoyable and fun and natural for me that, I can feel my own confidence surging in my own ability to talk about these ideas. You know what I mean?
That's good. And I think there's like a Buddhist monastery really, really near here, a couple hours away, that's really popular. Pema Chowdhury used to run it. She's like a popular writer. Yeah. And she has this thing that she does with her, students, where she talks about concentric circles. And now I talk about it all the time because I think it's really important. So there's the tiny circle in the center, and that's where we're comfortable. That's our like Netflix and chill. Don't go out of our way, do the things we're comfortable doing, talk to the people we've always known that we're comfortable with. That's the circle that a lot of people want to live in. And then there's a circle that's kind of wider, and that's the space where we learn. That's the space where we're kind of familiar, it's people we kind of know, it's things we have transferable skills in, maybe that we, right? But we still have place to learn there, and there's a lot of discomfort. And then there's the big circle, which is like, you're gonna fucking drown trying to swim the English Channel. You just learned to swim yesterday. You can't do that. Give it some time, right?
Yeah.
The cool thing about the circles is that they change and grow. So if you spend your entire life, and I think a lot of people do this, seeking comfort and not having uncomfortable conversations and not challenging what you think you believe to be true, and not taking part in discourse, even if it turns out you were wrong, which I've been wrong so many times. I could be wrong 15 times on here or more.
Yeah.
But
who knows?
If you don't have those conversations, you never actually grow. But it's worse than that. You don't just not grow, you shrink, because as you get older, the things that you're familiar with end, right? Like I used to hate DVDs. I used to hate them so bad. I was like, give me fucking VHS or give me death.
Yeah.
And So, if I'd never done that, like I couldn't watch any of the fucking movies that I like anymore. And then if I'd held on to DVDs, I'd be screwed because like now Netflix or whatever the hell people watch, right? But technology changes. So if you never actually learn to grasp anything new, then like you can no longer move on with the world and you lose the ability to take part in it. People will die that people will move away. Your job might get change. Like you have to grow or else your circle and therefore your mental health shrinks, it suffers. But if you actually go the other way, if you spend most of your time in the middle circle, where you're constantly, as you've suggested, learning to grow, trying new things, being uncomfortable, and there's lots of, it probably doesn't seem that way because I've just talked about like bodily whatever, but there's lots of things that make me uncomfortable, and yet that's the stuff that I lean into because that's where I'm going to actually grow. That's where I learn who I am. That's how I learn what I value. That's how I learn what the people that I care about value, and that's how I build intimacy. So the middle circle is a cool place to hang out, but you can't skip the middle circle because if you jump to like, I just got my feet wet yesterday and now I'm swimming the English Channel, you're probably going to die unless you get super lucky and a boat picks you up.
Yeah.
But if you do spend the time in the middle circle, then your comfortable circle, instead of shrinking, grows. So the middle circle becomes your comfortable circle. And that circle that was impossible becomes something that is very attainable, and the outer circle grows. So I often, when I teach yoga, I tell people that I'm like, just keep trying. It doesn't actually matter if you get anywhere, you won't regress, as long as you're careful. And it's incredibly important that we do this in terms of our social organizing because words change. I talk to kids all the time who are coming out as trans or pansexual or bi or just like super okay with their sexuality in high school, like already knowing about masturbation or feminism or critical race theory at an age that I would never have known it. And they teach me things because the language changes, the culture changes. And if we don't shift with it, if we don't have these uncomfortable conversations, then there literally is no hope because we're all in our bubbles, sad and alone.
Mary, that is so inspiring. And I think that a lot of people will walk away from that thinking about their comfort bubbles and how to live a little bit more maybe in that second bubble. Fabulous. Well, yeah. Thank you so much for coming back for your second and third appearances on Unscripted Moments, a podcast about propaganda. I just feel so lucky. And like I said, I'm just glad you're my friend, and I'm glad that we can hang out and have these totally amazing conversations that push me a little bit, and hopefully the listeners will benefit from too. So thank you for being here.
I'm all about let's have a propaganda podcast meeting. Chris Hanna, if you're listening, you have to have another October 3-day show. And let me actually come when it's not COVID and traveling doesn't suck. I would love to have like a giant propaganda fan hang out. Maybe Chris might want to go as well. It's so cool.
Translation, she slurs. How much more bullshit you got left? guy wants to know what's going on in the room. What's going on in the room? What's that?
The world is going down fucking hill. That's what's going on in the fucking world.
No kidding. Hey.
Not till 2100. That's when the Earth's temperature rises 6 degrees and methane hydrates
anybody
released at an
see on
enormous
the
rate
news?
and global